it's kind of one of the great mysteries of archaeology is the transition from Olmec culture to like Proto-Mayan. And so there's a lot of theories out there, but this is one of the leading candidates.
And the Book of Mormon is the best answer.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
come on.
it fits exactly what the Book of Mormon describes.
That's
as
a
happening
much
to the
more
Jaredites.
academic answer.
Glory, glory, glory.
So we find the infrastructure system at the right time and in the right places exactly as we have described in the Book of Mormon. That for a lot of Book of Mormon researchers is tied to the Gehly robbers.
And that's actually what Mormon said specifically. He said it was desolate, but desolate only for timber. So
Interesting.
So his statement actually matches exactly what we're finding in the Pollen court at exactly the right times.
The following is an episode of Ward Radio and does not represent the thoughts or the opinions of KHTS, its owners, or any of its affiliates, nor does it represent the official opinion of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to Ward Radio. I am your host, Cardinellis. Today I'm joined in the studio by Josh Gehly as well as by Jerry Grover. And we're embarked on a really fun 10-part series here where we investigate all the cool archaeological and geological evidences for the Book of Mormon. One of the first ones being some massive deforestation that has been discovered representative of the land of desolation in the Book of Helaman. This is pretty cool. Josh calls it the Book of Helaman, but you know, we say Helaman. But so this is going to be really fun.
Tomato.
Yeah, tomato. But either way, Josh, this is some incredible evidences. Your credentials are superb. Jerry's are phenomenal. Tell me more. I'm loving what I heard before this show started. Let's talk about the cement and deforestation of the Book of Helaman. I feel like this is almost like a welcome video that you get in a visitor center, like, you know, welcome to the land of desolation as described in the Book of Mormon. This is so cool. Josh Gehly, go.
Well, we're going to do an aerial over Mexico and zoom in on the East Coast, because what happens with the Nephites who are living in that area at this time period is they're spreading out and living across the land northward, and all of a sudden we get these little descriptions that are in the text. And these little descriptions are going to be really important when you're trying to place the Book of Mormon into a real setting where real people were living in a real space in a real time. So to overlay this into a real world setting, we read some of the scriptures and it begins to describe and talk about how as the Nephites were spreading into this land, they were spreading across all parts of the land, whatever parts that had not already been rendered desolate and without timber, because of the many inhabitants who had before inherited the land. And it goes on and even says that there being but little timber upon the face of the land, the people went forth, they became exceedingly expert in the working of cement. Therefore, they did build houses of the cement. And it even goes on and says that they're building even basically synagogues and temples and their cities with a certain type of material. So we have two things that have been identified within this time period of the text. Is within a certain time period of the Book of Mormon, you're going to be looking for a certain space and you're going to be able to identify large-scale construction that's being done with cement, and also identifying roughly in the same time period a lack of available timber. So those are two things that actually you could quantify and be able to examine in any real-world setting that you would have for Book of Mormon places and things. So we're going to look at a Mesoamerican setting. And if you go to slide 1, we're just going to get a little bit of visual for everybody on a map. We're going to use John Sorensen's maps right now for us so that we can properly overlay this in a real-world setting where you're looking at basically the Gulf Coast, the Bay of Campeche, and the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. And in this model, the land northward is going to be kind of north and east of those areas. So Jerry, any comments before we dive in? Any mapping things you want to share?
It also corresponds archaeologically. The Jaredites correlate with the Olmecs. So
yes,
whenever we say Jaredite, the reality is we're really talking Olmec archaeology, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, speaking of visuals, I am digging that jacket, bro. I mean, this is, you talk Campeche, like is that the brand that made that tasteful floral track jacket that I'm looking at right now?
Spring in Erie takes about 3 days and it comes and goes really fast. So I'm just taking advantage of the time.
Yeah. All right. I was going to say, holy smoke, man. Like, you are the coolest archaeologist I have ever seen in my life. I am digging this. All right. Okay. So we're basically saying, as you guys can see on the screen here, and if you're listening to us on the radio, you can check this out at hometownstation.com, or you can check us out on YouTube. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see on the live stream screen right here that we're basically looking at the area. What's a modern city that you would say is right by here? La Venta, I believe is the modern city. Tres Zapotes.
Pretty ancient cities that you're describing right there.
Okay, what's a modern city that this is by that you would say?
Coatzacoalcos is right kind of by La Venta, and then all the way up to Veracruz would be on the north.
Yeah, Veracruz would be.
Okay, cool. Rock on. So this is basically in the area of Veracruz, Mexico. All right, awesome.
The Tuxtla Mountains and things like that are in the geographic region.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, sick. Awesome. All right, keep going. Hit it. Take it away.
Well, okay, so one thing that we do is we find within this model that exists is there is cement that dates to the correct time in the correct place. So both even further south and to the east with the Maya, all the way up into this area, cement is a known practice. So they would basically
why is that so significant, though? Because isn't that a big criticism of the Book of Mormon by people that try and say that, like, oh, no way it could have happened, is they say, like, oh, there was no cement in the New World. Wasn't that like the soundbite for 50 years?
Well, it's probably the soundbite for more like 100 years from Joseph Smith's time into the 20th century. And then really some of the archaeological excavations within Mesoamerica really changed the whole narrative. So
okay, and how recent are these?
Well, I would say these works were discovered as early as the 19th century, but actual digging in the dirt and getting hands-on and knowledge about some of these cultures, whether it's Zapotec culture or Mayan culture or Olmec culture, is only within the last 70 years that it's really advanced.
And specifically this claim of cement, and I guess would you call it Mayan cement, Olmec cement, whatever you want to call it, it seems like I've only heard chatter about this in maybe the past 20 years. Am I correct?
Well, some of my citations are like 1996, 1998, things like that. So,
all right, rock on.
But it was known before then, but that's just some of the citations that we have in the work.
That was kind of like when it was like official, right?
Well,
okay.
yeah. And
excellent. Okay, keep going.
So the lime plaster, what would happen is they would take, there's heavy amounts of limestone available in the region. They would take that and they would burn it. So the cement would get made, and it's kind of like a plaster that would get made, and it would be burned. So you're actually using timber to create the cement. So there's one thing that's going on, and also in the same time period, there's massive the population's growing. People are getting more centralized. The cities are getting more structurally complex, like culturally complex. And so with that complexity, you have to feed a population. So you have agriculture that's going on within the same areas. But if you go to the next slide card, and what you're going to see is some of the examples that you can find across Mesoamerica. So that's a house. So when it talks about cities burning, you can actually see that they're using some wood structures within a typical Mayan culture. That's a typical Mayan house. And if you go on to the next slide, what we're actually going to describe is the massive cities that you can find across Mesoamerica that are using this like lime plastered cement, and there's actually timber structures even within that cement. This is actually an archaeological site from Tikal. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, I'm also a structural civil engineer, so this is some things I've published. So essentially, one of the issues was, well, why do you need timber for these cement structures? But in Mesoamerica, in Mayan particularly, you have the Corbel arch. The true arch is not really known. And a Corbel arch, you have to have what they call a tensile connector, so it doesn't collapse.
So it doesn't collapse inwards or fall outwards,
right?
Correct?
Because concrete it's good for compaction, but not for tensile strength. That's why you add rebar when you do concrete. So these trees, these hardwood trees, were essential for the building of those structures. And that's why the Book of Mormon says when they didn't have them, they couldn't build they lack timber to build the larger structures.
This is so interesting. So if I actually look on the screen right here and I were to describe to the listeners what I'm seeing, what I'm looking at is kind of like how in Ireland sometimes you get burnt out castles, where people go and they take their really cool pictures of like burnt out castles, and you can absolutely tell that though the walls were made out of stone and though the frame and the foundation is made out of stone, it's obvious all of the roofing material was made out of wood and now it's gone. And so it looks like we're seeing something similar here in Mesoamerica, in ancient Mesoamerica, I should say, except for we're privileged with the ability to see a couple of these giant entire logs that are used as like
structural
spans.
Reinforcement. Yeah,
like roofing joists, as we would say in construction, and they're still there, and proof that that was indeed a method used to make these cement structures. And so this correlates perfectly with the Book of Mormon when it says, if I'm kind of steel manning your argument here and your claim, is you're saying, wow, like literally the Book of Mormon says as soon as they ran out of these timbers, then they were no longer able to make their large cement buildings. And I assume that's what would lead us in later to the other half of this claim, that there was massive deforestation that you guys have encountered, right?
Yeah, it's going to lead a little bit into that, but
overall, I'm taking it away. I'm getting ahead of myself. Go.
Overall, exactly what you're describing, though, Cardin, and Jerry can jump in too on this. But they're finding in the Book of Helaman there that what they're doing is they're actually finding areas that had the timber so they could build the buildings, and so they're not using the land that's desolate because they can't actually build the structures as it's being described. But that's exactly what we find across the landscape. So
yeah, and the other thing is it says they were expert in cement. And actually the Mayan cement is comparable to the Roman cement. They actually did really interesting things like adding sap of trees as organics during the slaking process and things.
Really?
So they are actually very sophisticated. And so the Book of Mormon is actually very correct in talking about their level of sophistication. And they used the cement without the sap for certain functions and with it. So it depended on if they were doing stucco or...
I have heard so much about this ancient cement. And first off, I love what I'm hearing because I cannot stand the arrogance of so much of previous archaeology that was done, where it's like people like, oh, there's no way anybody non-European figured this out in ancient times, right? And second off, what the ancients were pulling off blows my mind. Like, have you heard about that dock that they discovered that the Romans had built for their ships, where it was made with this hydraulic cement made with ox blood that is still getting harder and harder and harder every year because they figured out if you mixed ox blood with their cement mixture for their ancient hydraulic cement, that it actually slowly hardened it over time through the chemical process. And like they've taken core samples. I'm, by the way, butchering my regurgitation.
No, you're saying it exactly right, Cardin, perfectly. Yeah, without flaw. But so to your point though, of like the incredible people of the past and what they did, like to even get into like Mayan culture, there was a graduate student that went on and got his doctorate at Penn State that I knew really well. One of the things he discovered was actually some of the aqueduct system that Mayans would use to even create natural through gravity reinforced, but would create a water fountain in the middle of the city based on gravity and how they were adjusting the water and how it came in. So yeah, people are incredible across all time. And it even gets better than just like basic building structure. Even if you go to 3 Nephi chapter 6, verse 8, it begins to describe massive highway projects that they were doing. And what's amazing is that when we find these within Mesoamerica, what they're doing is they're making them out of the same type of like plaster type limestone cement that they were burning and creating to lay these roads. So we find the infrastructure system at the right time and in the right places exactly as we have described in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got a picture of those.
Yeah, on the next slide.
Oh, sick. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that's
this looks like a modern highway just with dirt.
But you see the stones on the side and the plaster concrete stuff
that would be laid on top of that. Yeah. So they would lay a couple different foundations, and then on top of that they would put the plaster cement reinforced, and that was running for miles and miles and miles between cities. It's pretty incredible. Yeah. LiDAR has helped visualize this. They knew it was there. These aren't surprises, but everybody sees the popular LiDAR stuff that's out there, and it just has reinforced our understanding of maybe the scale of what that is, maybe a little bit broader.
So this is an ancient Olmec road, basically.
This one's probably Maya.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an ancient Mayan or Proto-Mayan road that we're looking at right here that literally looks like if it had pavement, it would be considered modern. You know what I'm saying? If it had blacktop, it would be considered modern. That is absolutely incredible. How does this square with people that say, okay, well, they didn't have the wheel anciently, yet there's these big roads? Was it to avoid water that they were building, not necessarily for the ease of wheeled carts and so on and so forth? Why elevate it and provide this foundation? Have they described a reason for that specifically, you think?
I don't know if there's specific reasons, but roadways can promote safety and travel like across culture. So there's probably a lot of economic reasons why having a highway.
Just for ease,
highways make sense economically today. Highways make sense economically 2,000 years ago.
So. Rock on. Okay, cool.
There was high rainfall in a lot of that area too. So
okay, because I was about to say I noticed that looks like pretty well elevated. So anyway, okay, keep going.
So if just to get a view of the scale, if you hit the next slide, Cardin, what you're going to look at is one of the incredible cities, and anybody listening in can look up Teotihuacan. And by the way, go. It's incredible. What an incredible site. That was literally one of the largest cities in the world at its peak and at its time frame. And it was loaded with cement. They were building structures out of cement, massive pyramids, the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and just the scale of what was going on there's obsidian from Teotihuacan that gets tracked all the way up into way north in the Americas because it was such in high demand. So like trade over time in different places would cross over 1,000 miles from this place. So it was a hub that for a lot of Book of Mormon researchers is tied to the Gadianton robbers. And actually this is an example of a city that was deforested. So it suffered a collapse that happens later that is tied. Now, this postdates Book of Mormon times, but it actually suffered the exact description of the problems that we identify in the Book of Mormon. So Teotihuacan's a great example to at least have these type of discussions. And Jerry, if you want to throw anything out there on the Teotihuacanos before you go in, the Teotihuacano version of the Mayan number 9 is on the characters document that Jerry's researched. So there's some awesome stuff tied to this.
Yeah, and Teotihuacan would be, we said Veracruz area. That was kind of the central. This is the very northern extent of the land northward would be Teotihuacan. In the Book of Mormon, it talks about people migrating clear extremely to the north. So it's that it still falls within the Book of Mormon geographic models, and it's just a cement like you've never seen before.
Wow, this is super cool. All right, dude, holy smoke. Keep going. I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose, but it's the tastiest fire hose in the city, man. So keep going, my man. Keep going.
Well, we laced it pretty good, so it's yummy. If you hit up the last slide, it's laced with the Spirit. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, rock on.
If we go to the last slide, I'll let Jerry take this, but there's even to dial in much more specifically. So Teotihuacan, the deforestation that happens there, it's a little bit late for it to be what's being described there in the Book of Helaman, but it's still a good example from the correct rough area that we're talking about. But Jerry's dialed it in a little bit more because there's been pollen core samples that have been researched and uncovered. And that's how can you tell in a certain area in geography that deforestation has happened? Well, maybe you might see population decline. Maybe you identified that archaeologically and you say, oh, well, maybe the population decline's tied to that. But, actually probably the best way is through some of these pollen core samples. And I'm going to let Jerry kind of extrapolate on this side.
Yeah, what's a pollen core sample, bro? Hit it.
Okay. Well, kind of going off of what Josh said, Mormon is describing things that happened before, and so it is a little bit sequential in his description. He doesn't talk about years, but so he first he says that there was deforestation from the people that lived there before, which is talking about the Olmec Jaredites, right? So, and then you have Teotihuacan, they're about 100 BC starting up, so that was more what you call Nephite, using cement and that kind of thing. So it's actually, if you kind of go through it, it actually tracks chronologically. Now, so what you do if you're trying to determine something like deforestation, you have to look at historical pollen counts. That's a typical way. Now, these particular studies weren't done for that purpose. They were actually trying to figure out when maize got domesticated. So they were actually looking for pollen counts of the agricultural product. But what they found was about 600 BC. You essentially had a drop in just the hardwoods. Agricultural still continued to spread agricultural pollen. So it was just that the hardwood pollens.
So pollen samples, if I ever understand you correctly, there's a way, just like maybe, I don't know, they do ice cores in Antarctica.
It's a core sample.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
just
a core
like ice
sample.
core
Okay.
sample. It's a core sample of the sediment.
So, yeah, okay. So it's a core sample of the sediment. So they just take, kind of like you see the dudes ice fishing, I assume, they just cut a hole with some cool little auger in the ice. Yep. You guys probably, how far down do you go for a core sample? Is this like a 20-foot sample, a 100-foot sample? Is this the dirt they dig up when they're digging an oil rig? Like, how's that work?
You have to find the right environment. So you typically look for marshes or lakes where they have sequential deposition that's not disturbed, like by people plowing it up.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then they core it. Now it depends on how much gets deposited every year, how deep they need to core.
Okay,
right?
awesome.
And then they just take slices of that, just like the ice cores, and they look at a section and then they
so
count the pollen.
Guys,
like tree ring dating, you can just go layer by layer by layer to date something.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So you guys, meaning the smart people, the geologists and the archaeologists, not the radio hosts. Okay, so the archaeologists and the geologists have figured out a way to take core samples of the earth in which they can specifically target the type of pollen that is there. And just like there's rings in a tree or layers of ice in the Antarctic, you've been able to figure that out, that at a very specific time, all of the pollen for the hardwoods in the region just disappeared all of a sudden. But the grasses didn't disappear. The dandelions didn't disappear. The vines didn't disappear. But specifically the pollen for the big bad oak trees or whatever was down there all of a sudden just goes away.
Yeah, and that's actually what Mormon said specifically. He said it was desolate, but desolate only for timber. So
Interesting.
So his statement actually matches exactly what we're finding in the pollen cores at exactly the right times. And essentially,
wow. Okay.
And it also helps explain, if people are not familiar with the Olmec culture, but it ended somewhat suddenly around 400 BC or so.
Okay.
And based on the defacing of the colossal heads and other things, they've proposed a civil war is one of the reasons why they disappeared. Now.
Wow. Okay.
And this actually,
it's kind of one of the great mysteries of archaeology is the transition from Olmec culture to like Proto-Mayan. And so there's a lot of theories out there, but this is one of the leading candidates.
And the Book of Mormon is the best answer.
Yeah.
Come on. It fits exactly what the Book of Mormon describes.
That's
as
a
happening
much
to
more
the Jaredites.
academic answer. It fits the description very accurately. Yes.
Bullseye.
And it also tracks with what meaning because they use slash and burn as kind of the agricultural approach that they use, or they would
clear a field,
clear a field, and then they would plant the corn. What looks to be happening is they've cleared out all the trees for any of the most of the agricultural land and growing. So it actually indicates that they were maximizing the resource use for agriculture, which I think gives you an explanation as to why all these wars started amongst the Olmec, because now you have resource restriction, which, I'm not an anthropologist.
As populations are growing, which creates competition, which creates fighting, which is exactly what we read at the same time and same place within the Book of Mormon.
Also, we dealt with this.
Exactly.
We dealt with this in the 90s. I mean, I think one of the reasons why that one charity, where if you donate $1,000, they buy an acre in the Amazon or whatever, is we dealt with the problems of slash and burn in the 90s and the early 2000s because some of the local farmers in these areas were slashing and burning in order to grow cash crops, but they found out that the decay of the jungle matter is what put the nutrients into the soil because the soil isn't super good. So after you slash and burn the field, you could only grow crops for maybe a couple of years before you depleted the nutrients. And then you had to go to the next acre over and then slash and burn again.
That happened in Mesoamerica also.
And that's what we're saying is happening.
Yeah. And so so like what happened in the 90s, could have been also the basis for war and the collapse of the Olmec civilization.
I was feeling that just when Ed picked me up from the airport and we went through the traffic. So I mean,
Welcome to Southern California,
talk about poor highways. Also,
we need to construct something.
The Maya, I think,
you're out of cement.
You're not in Pennsylvania anymore, bro. We haven't built a new freeway.
Our
since
forests are beautiful.
Okay, that's funny.
And further commenting a little bit, it's just essentially in the Book of Mormon, in the Jaredite record, it does show the wars starting about that same time and continuing. So it actually tracks exactly with what we're seeing.
Okay, awesome. So if I were just really fast to summarize everything that we've heard here, unfortunately we got to go on a commercial break here pretty soon, but before we go on that commercial break, if I were to summarize what we heard here, is that all of you big-brained archaeologists that have simultaneously read the Book of Mormon and also studied archaeology and geology have noticed a correspondence between core samples taken and pollen samples taken in Mesoamerica of the different hardwoods and trees that could be used and were used archaeologically for Olmec and Proto-Mayan architecture and so on and so forth, that you have evidence that there is a massive deforestation of the exact type of timbers that were used in this ancient archaeological architecture that corresponds with the verses in the Book of Mormon and Helaman that describes basically the buildings of the ancient peoples of the Book of Mormon. And it's just a correlation that cannot be overlooked.
And kudos to Jerry, because he's literally the one to identify some of those pollen core samples and bring them out to the public. So
if you weren't so far away in the studio, I would pat you on the back, Jerry. Good job, buddy.
You can pat me on the head. Can you reach my head?
You know what I'm saying? I can almost reach your head. So anyway, all right. Well, thanks so much for swinging by, guys. This is absolutely amazing. I literally kind of, every time I talk with you guys, I feel like I just need a little bit more time to process it afterwards. So unfortunately we have to take a commercial break, but this has been totally real and it's been totally fun. And as always, for this and more, please check us out at WardRadio.com.